What would you do if fake cops showed up at your door, demanding you leave your dream home over a tree? Picture this. Their smug faces drained of color as my wife, a high-ranking military officer, flashed her badge and demanded, "Who sent you?" The HOA thought they could bully us out of our new home because of a 200-year-old maple tree in our yard. Oh, they had no idea who they were dealing with. We were ready to fight for our family's future, and we'd show them what happens when you challenge the wrong couple. If you're watching from Florida, drop "never mess with military families" in the comments below. Let me take you into the heart of our battle against a ruthless HOA that underestimated our resolve. Here at Daily Narrated Stories, we bring you tales of courage, resilience, and triumph that will leave you inspired. Stick with us for a story you won't forget. My wife, Lauren, and I had spent over a year searching for the perfect home after 18 years of military moves and base life. I'd served 15 years as an Army engineer before becoming a civil architect, while Lauren, recently promoted to Major General, commanded security at the nearby Air Force Base. When we found that stunning Victorian house with a sprawling backyard and a towering 200-year-old maple tree, we knew it was the one. It was perfect for our 12-year-old daughter, Emily, who'd grown up amidst constant relocations. That maple tree held promises of a treehouse, a rope swing, and the stable childhood we'd always dreamed of giving her, its branches stretching like a protective embrace over the grassy expanse. The neighborhood was pristine, manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, and an air of perfection that should have tipped us off. In our excitement to finally settle down, we skimmed the HOA agreement and signed without a second thought, a mistake that would soon unleash a storm we never saw coming. We'd faced combat zones and military red tape, but nothing prepared us for the suburban conspiracy waiting to test our limits. Imagine you're in our shoes. The HOA is coming for your home over a beloved tree. Would you confront them head-on at the next meeting, or gather evidence quietly before making your move? Comment your choice below, and let's see what you'd do. Also, if you love gripping stories like this, please subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to us. Just 4 days after we moved into our new home, the air still thick with the scent of cardboard and fresh paint, our doorbell echoed through the half-unpacked living room. I opened the door to find Margaret Thompson, the HOA president, standing there with a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her hazel eyes. She wore a sharp navy blazer, her auburn hair pulled into a flawless bun, but there was a coldness in her demeanor that made the summer breeze feel suddenly frigid. "Welcome to Maple Grove Estates," she said, her voice polished but edged with something unplaceable as she handed me a welcome basket. Inside were local coupons, a glossy HOA rulebook, and a faint whiff of lavender, a deceptive gesture of warmth that belied the storm she was about to unleash. Margaret's gaze drifted past me, her eyes narrowing as they landed on our front yard. Moving boxes were still stacked on the porch, their edges softened by the morning dew, and Emily's bright red scooter lay tipped over on the grass, a splash of color against the green. Her smile twitched, a subtle flicker of disapproval that sent a ripple of unease through me. For the next 25 minutes, she delivered what she called a friendly introduction, but it felt more like a military inspection I'd endured during my Army days. She listed the exact shade of fence paint we were allowed, eggshell white, nothing else, the approved mailbox designs, and the strict lawn maintenance rules that demanded grass be no taller than 2.5 inches. When she reached the section on landscaping, her tone sharpened, her words slicing through the humid air. "That maple tree in your backyard," she said, peering through our open back door at the tree's sprawling canopy, its leaves whispering in the breeze. "It's quite overwhelming. Most residents prefer a more refined look. You might want to remove it to fit our aesthetic standards." I felt a jolt in my chest, the same tension I'd experienced when given absurd orders in the Army, orders that made no sense but demanded compliance. The maple tree wasn't just a plant, it was a promise to Emily, a symbol of the stability we'd fought for through years of deployments and uncertainty. I could still hear her delighted squeal when she first saw it, her small hands tracing the rough bark as she whispered, "This is where my treehouse will go, right, Daddy?" That memory anchored me as I met Margaret's gaze. "The maple stays," I said, my voice steady but firm, the words carrying the weight of a line drawn in the sand. Margaret's smile flickered, a glint of something calculating flashing in her eyes before her polished facade returned. "We'll see," she said, her tone dripping with unspoken threats, each syllable a challenge wrapped in silk. "The HOA takes our community's appearance very seriously. I'm sure you'll want to be good neighbors." As she turned to leave, her heels clicking sharply on the porch steps, the air felt heavier, like a storm brewing on the horizon. I closed the door, the basket still in my hands, its lavender scent now cloying. Lauren caught my gaze from across the room, her expression grim as she set down a box labeled Kitchen Fragile. Having spent years in military intelligence before her current role as a security commander, she could read people like a battlefield map, every gesture, every inflection a clue to their intent. "We've got trouble," she whispered, her voice low with concern, her brow furrowed in a way that reminded me of late nights poring over classified briefings. "She's not just enforcing rules, she's marking her territory." The weight of her words settled over me like a fog, stirring a mix of dread and determination. I could feel the fight ahead, but its shape remained shadowy, a threat lurking just out of sight. A week later, the neighborhood's welcome barbecue at the community center confirmed Lauren's suspicions. The scent of grilled burgers and sunscreen filled the air, children's laughter mingling with the hum of conversation as residents gathered on the manicured lawn. Most were warm, their smiles genuine as they welcomed us to Maple Grove. James Carter, a history professor who lived a few houses down, approached us with a soda in hand, his graying beard framing a kind grin. "Don't let Margaret scare you," he whispered, leaning in as he shook my hand, his voice barely audible over the chatter. "She's run this place like her personal kingdom since her husband passed 3 years ago." His words carried a warning, but also a flicker of hope, an ally in a brewing storm. As we mingled, I noticed how conversations hushed when Margaret walked by, her presence casting a shadow over the festive atmosphere. She held court near the dessert table, her auburn bun glinting in the sunlight, her eyes occasionally darting toward us with a predatory glint that made my skin prickle. I tried to focus on the small talk, neighbors asking about my architecture work, Lauren sharing stories of base life, but the tension was palpable, a current running beneath the surface of every smile. Near the event's end, Margaret tapped her glass for attention, the clink cutting through the noise like a gunshot. After announcing upcoming events, a garden tour, a book club meeting, she added with a saccharine smile, "Let's all help our new neighbors, the Graysons, understand our standards. Their yard needs significant work to meet our expectations." The words, laced with public shame, hung in the air like a guillotine, sharp and unyielding. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably, their eyes dropping to their plates, the clatter of forks suddenly loud in the silence. My blood boiled, a heat rising in my chest as I clenched my fists, the urge to confront her nearly overwhelming. But Lauren's hand on my arm stopped me, her touch a silent command to stand down. She was always the strategist, her mind 3 steps ahead, knowing when to hold fire and when to strike. Her hazel eyes met mine, a flicker of resolve in their depths, and I exhaled, forcing the anger down. Later that night, as we prepared for bed, the barbecue's tension still clung to us like smoke. Lauren sat cross-legged on the floor, a notebook in hand, her pen moving with military precision. "What's that?" I asked, peering over her shoulder, the dim glow of the bedside lamp casting shadows on the page. "Our war plan," she replied, her voice steady with resolve, her gaze fixed on the paper as if it were a battlefield map. "Margaret just declared war, and we need to map the battlefield." Her eyes gleamed with the same intensity I'd seen during high-stakes missions, a fire that had guided us through chaos before. "First step, know your enemy, know your ground. Tomorrow, we dissect that HOA agreement, find allies, and secure our legal footing." She was right. This was only the beginning of a long fight, and we needed to be ready. I sat beside her, the weight of her words settling into my bones, and together we began to strategize, the quiet of the night broken only by the scratch of her pen and the distant chirp of crickets outside. 2 weeks after moving in, the first official HOA notice arrived. A formal letter slipped into our mailbox, its crisp white envelope stark against the black metal. It cited our grass as 0.3 inches too long, a violation that came with a $75 fine. I stared at the paper, disbelief mixing with anger, my fingers tightening around the edges until they crinkled. I'd mowed the lawn just 3 days ago, the scent of fresh-cut grass still lingering in my memory, and our yard looked as pristine as any other in the neighborhood. This wasn't about grass. It was about control, a power play meant to break us. The notices kept coming, each one more absurd than the last. One for our trash cans being visible 2 minutes past pickup time, the sun glinting off their lids as I rushed to move them. Another for Emily's chalk drawings on our driveway, her bright pink hearts and stars deemed. Unsightly, each violation slapped with a fine that began to stack up like a house of cards, threatening to topple our finances. "This is absurd," I growled, holding the latest notice in my trembling hands, the paper claiming our mailbox was a 1/4 inch too short, a measurement so precise it bordered on madness. "They're inventing violations now. Lauren sat at the dining table, surrounded by a fortress of HOA documents, city ordinances, and legal notes, her laptop casting a blue glow on her focused face. "Not entirely," she said, adjusting her glasses, a habit from her intelligence days that surfaced when she was deep in analysis. "They're exploiting vague wording in the covenant. This section on visual harmony is so broad they can claim anything as a violation." She tapped a page, her expression fierce, her finger tracing the underlined words as if they were a code to crack. "But they're overstepping. Some of these fines violate local laws, which override HOA rules. We can use that." James became a crucial ally, inviting us over for coffee on his porch the next morning, the scent of roasted beans mingling with the crisp autumn air. "Margaret took over after her husband died 4 years ago," he explained, his voice low as he glanced around, ensuring we weren't overheard. He was strict but fair, kept the HOA in check. "Margaret, though, she's using it to fill the void he left. She's got a former detective, Henry Marshall, on the board. He's her enforcer, does her dirty work." His words sent a chill through me, the pieces of Margaret's strategy clicking into place. As if on cue, we started noticing Henry's gray SUV creeping past our house at odd hours, its headlights slicing through the darkness like a predator's eyes. Sometimes he'd park across the street, snapping photos with a long lens, the camera's shutter a faint click in the night. When I confronted him one evening, the air thick with the scent of rain, he muttered about documenting violations, but couldn't name a single rule we'd broken, his eyes darting away as he sped off. The constant surveillance weighed on us, a heavy fog that seeped into every moment of our lives, especially for Emily. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across our yard, she tugged at my sleeve, her voice small and trembling. "Dad, can I play in the backyard instead?" she asked, her brown eyes wide with fear. "The man in the gray car scares me." My heart sank, a mix of guilt and rage churning in my chest like a storm. I wanted to shield her from this, to give her the carefree childhood she deserved, the one we dreamed of when we first saw that maple tree. I knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice softer than I felt. "Let's go build that rope swing you wanted." But inside, I was burning, the weight of her fear fueling my resolve to fight back. That night, Lauren installed military-grade security cameras around our property, her movements precise as she adjusted each lens under the glow of a flashlight. "We need evidence," she said, her breath visible in the cool night air, her voice steady but laced with a quiet intensity. "Every move they make, every claim they fabricate, we'll have proof." She paused, her hand resting on the last camera, her expression softening for a moment, a rare vulnerability breaking through her commander's facade. "Something's off, Nathan. This isn't just HOA nonsense. They're targeting us, and I need to know why." Her words hung in the air, a question that gnawed at me as I watched the maple tree's silhouette sway in the moonlight, its branches whispering secrets we hadn't yet uncovered. The first HOA meeting we attended confirmed our fears. The community center transformed into a battleground. The room was stark, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the air heavy with tension as residents sat in rows, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Margaret sat at a raised table with Henry and other board members, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk. When the floor opened for concerns, I stood, my heart pounding as I outlined the baseless violations and selective enforcement, my voice steady despite the weight of every gaze on me. Before I could finish, Margaret interrupted, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "The Graysons have planted unapproved flowers in their front yard," she announced, as Henry projected photos of Lauren's tulips on the wall, their vibrant yellow petals stark against the screen. "The covenant requires prior approval for all modifications." James stood beside me, his voice firm, his presence a steady anchor in the storm. "Point of order. I was on the board 3 years ago, and annual flowers never needed approval. The covenant only covers permanent changes." A few residents nodded, a murmur of agreement rippling through the crowd, but Margaret's expression didn't waver, her lips curling into a thin, unyielding line. "The board has reinterpreted that rule," she said icily, her words a decree meant to silence dissent. "The fine stands at $600, plus $75 daily until the flowers are removed." The vote passed 5-2, with only James dissenting, the gavel's sharp rap echoing like a gunshot. As we left, the isolation stung. Neighbors avoided our eyes, their footsteps quick as they hurried out, and we knew we were being made an example of, a warning to anyone who dared to defy Margaret's reign. Later that night, Lauren reviewed the security footage in our dimly lit living room, the glow of the laptop screen casting shadows on her face as she leaned closer. "Look," she said, pointing to Henry's SUV parked across from our house at 3 a.m., the timestamp glowing in the corner of the screen. "He's here almost every night. This isn't monitoring, it's stalking." Her voice trembled with a mix of anger and fear, a rare crack in her composed exterior that made my chest tighten. For the next 2 weeks, we gathered evidence like we were on a military operation, our nights filled with the hum of the laptop and the rustle of papers. Our cameras caught Henry and Margaret trespassing in our backyard at 2 a.m., Margaret gesturing at the maple tree while Henry took measurements, their silhouettes stark against the moonlight. The violation was clear, a blatant overstep that made my blood boil, but Lauren held back, her strategic mind always looking for the bigger play. "Let them think we're oblivious," she said, her tone sharp as she rewound the footage. "Surprise is our best weapon." The trespassing incident wasn't just a violation, it was a glimpse into their desperation, a crack in their facade that hinted at a larger scheme. I couldn't shake the image of Margaret pointing at the maple tree, her gestures animated, her voice too low for the cameras to catch. What was she planning? The question gnawed at me, a constant whisper in the back of my mind as we continued to build our case. James suggested we speak to Sarah Jenkins, a former resident who'd moved across town after selling her home at a loss. They targeted her over her own heritage maple, he whispered, handing us her contact information over a hurried lunch at a local diner, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting Margaret to appear. "She might have answers, but be discreet. Margaret doesn't forgive disloyalty." Sarah lived in a small apartment complex across town, the building's faded paint and cracked sidewalks a stark contrast to Maple Grove's pristine streets. She was hesitant at first, her hands shaking as she invited us into her modest living room, the air heavy with the scent of chamomile tea. "They fined us $2,000 a month over that tree," she said, her voice cracking as she clutched a worn photo album, flipping to a picture of her family beneath a towering maple, their smiles frozen in time. "We couldn't keep up after my husband lost his job during the pandemic. We had to sell." Her eyes brimmed with tears as she revealed the real reason. A developer had bought nearby properties and needed access through the green space behind her lot. Our maple was in the way of their next phase, just as hers had been. 3 months after we left, they rezoned the area, she said bitterly, her fingers tracing the photo's edges. The trees came down, and construction started. I heard Margaret got a payout from the developer. The revelation hit me like a punch, the pieces of Margaret's scheme snapping into focus with a clarity that made my stomach churn. This wasn't just about control, it was about money, power, and a conspiracy that stretched beyond our neighborhood. Lauren dug deeper, using her military contacts to access public records, her nights spent hunched over our dining table, the glow of her laptop a constant in the darkness. "Councilmember Richard Evans is on the zoning board that approved the development," she said late one night. Papers spread across the table like a battlefield map, her voice taut with urgency. "He's also an investor in Apex Construction." She pointed to a financial disclosure, her finger trembling slightly as she highlighted Margaret's name as a paid consultant for Apex, earning hefty fees that coincided with the timing of Sarah's ordeal. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. Margaret wasn't just a control freak. She was forcing out residents to clear the way for a lucrative development deal, and our maple tree, like Sarah's, was an obstacle in her path. The stakes grew heavier, the air in our home thick with the weight of what we'd uncovered, when Lauren uncovered Henry's past. She'd pulled strings with a contact at the local police department, her voice low and urgent as she spoke on the phone, pacing the kitchen as Emily slept upstairs. "He's not just overzealous," she said after hanging up, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. "Henry was forced to retire from the police force 5 years ago after a scandal involving falsified evidence. He's dangerous, Nathan, willing to break laws to get what he wants." The revelation sent a shiver down my spine, the memory of his gray SUV haunting our street now carrying a darker edge. What else was he capable of? The question lingered, a shadow that followed me through the days that followed. The next day, as Lauren was at the base, I spotted Henry parked down the street, watching our house through binoculars, his lack of subtlety adding a new layer of tension to the crisp morning air. The sun glinted off his windshield, a stark contrast to the unease settling in my gut. I decided to take a calculated risk, my heart pounding as I approached his SUV, the gravel crunching under my boots. "Spot any violations today, Henry?" I asked, forcing a smile, my voice lighter than I felt. He fumbled with the binoculars, his face reddening, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple despite the cool weather. "Just doing my job, Grayson," he snapped, his voice gruff, his eyes darting away as if searching for an escape. Before he sped off, he leaned out the window, his expression darkening. "You military types think you're above the law. Margaret won't let you ruin this neighborhood's value. Pack up now, it'll save you the trouble." His words were a threat, sharp and unyielding, and they echoed in my mind as I watched his taillights disappear around the corner. That evening, Lauren returned from the base, her face pale, her uniform slightly wrinkled from a long day. She waited until Emily was asleep, the soft glow of her nightlight filtering through the hallway, before sharing what she'd discovered. "I overheard something chilling," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as we sat in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator a stark contrast to the tension in her words. She'd been copying HOA financial records in the community office. The copier's rhythmic were a background to her racing thoughts, when Margaret and Henry walked in. Hiding in the copy room, the scent of toner sharp in her nose, she recorded their conversation on her phone, her hands trembling as she pressed the record button. Margaret's voice came through clearly, cold and calculated. "Evan says the zoning board meets next month. We need those properties cleared. The Graysons' Maple has to go." Henry replied, his tone gruff, "The legal route's too slow. I've got another way to speed things up." Margaret's laugh sent a chill through me, a cold, calculating sound that echoed in the quiet kitchen. "Do what you must, just keep it untraceable. I won't let a military family derail my plans." The recording ended, and we sat in stunned silence, the weight of their words pressing down on us like a physical force. This wasn't just harassment anymore. They were openly discussing illegal actions against us, their desperation a dangerous spark that could ignite at any moment. What was Henry's other way? The question hung between us, unanswered, a specter that haunted the shadows of our home. The next morning, a certified letter arrived, its official seal a stark contrast to the dreaded Inspired. It announced an emergency HOA meeting with one agenda item: legal action against us for covenant violations and possible eviction. "They're moving fast to control the narrative," James warned over the phone, his voice urgent as I paced the living room. The letter crumpled in my hand. "Expose what you found at this meeting, and Margaret's support might collapse." We had 4 days to prepare, the weight of our home, our community standing, and our maple tree's fate hanging in the balance, a heavy cloak that draped over every moment. "Time to weaponize our intelligence," Lauren said, her voice steely as she spread our evidence across the dining table, her movements precise, her eyes blazing with determination. They brought a clipboard to a battlefield. "Let's show them what happens." The days that followed were a blur of late nights and whispered plans, the scent of coffee and ink filling our home as we prepared for the fight ahead. We pored over every document, every piece of footage, building a case that felt like a fortress, unassailable and resolute. The meeting was scheduled for 6:30 p.m. on a Wednesday, a time clearly chosen to exclude working families, a calculated move that only fueled our resolve. Lauren took a rare day off to prepare, her uniform replaced by a simple sweater and jeans, her focus unwavering as she organized our evidence into neat folders. I worked remotely, finalizing our documents between client calls, the hum of my laptop a constant as I double-checked every detail. We opted against a lawyer, as Lauren reasoned. They'll expect legal representation, but they won't expect us to outmaneuver their own attorney. Margaret had hired Charles Bennett, a notorious HOA lawyer known for bullying residents into submission, his name a whispered warning among the neighbors. What she didn't know was that Lauren had studied his case history, pinpointing weaknesses in his aggressive tactics, her intelligence training giving us an edge they couldn't anticipate. The community center buzzed with tension on the night of the meeting, the largest turnout we'd seen, the air thick with whispers and sidelong glances. Margaret and her board sat at their elevated table, exuding confidence, their polished appearances a stark contrast to the nervous energy of the crowd. Charles arranged his documents with a smug air, his tailored suit a silent declaration of authority. We sat in the front row, calm and ready, our folders clutched in our hands, a quiet strength in our posture that seemed to unnerve Margaret. Her eyes flickered to us, a brief crack in her composure before she regained her icy control. "This emergency session addresses the Graysons' repeated violations," she began, her voice smooth, her words rehearsed. "Due to the severity of their infractions, we've authorized legal proceedings." Charles distributed packets, claiming our maple tree was a safety hazard, based on an arborist report, demanding its removal with $1,200 daily fines until compliance. When our turn came, I stood, my heart pounding but my voice steady, the weight of every eye in the room pressing against me. "I'd like to verify the arborist credentials," I said, my tone calm but pointed, the question a carefully aimed arrow. Charles smirked, producing a certificate with a flourish. Greenwood Consulting, fully licensed, he said, his voice dripping with confidence. I nodded, then projected a state record onto the wall. The document's stark text a damning revelation. Greenwood had dissolved 2 years ago. This report is fraudulent, a felony and legal proceedings, I said, the room falling silent, the air thick with shock as Charles's smirk faltered, his hands fumbling with his papers. Lauren stood beside me, distributing our evidence with military precision, her movements sharp and deliberate. Moreover, the original covenant protects heritage maples as community assets, she said, her voice cutting through the tension as she displayed historical records. The yellowed page is a testament to the tree's legacy. This protection overrides any new height rules. For the next 25 minutes, we dismantled their case, presenting photos proving our property's condition, our lawn pristine, the tulips vibrant against the green, citing county laws that superseded HOA rules, and exposing Margaret's ties to Apex Construction. Gasps filled the room as we revealed HOA funds funneled to consulting fees, matching Margaret's payments from Apex, the numbers a stark accusation on the screen. Margaret's composure cracked, her face twisting with fury as she leapt to her feet. This is ridiculous, she shouted, her voice rising, her auburn bun loosening as she gestured wildly. These military people are spinning conspiracies because they won't follow basic rules. But Charles, visibly shaken, couldn't counter our evidence, his hands trembling as he flipped through his notes, his confidence crumbling like a house of cards. The judge presiding over the hearing, a stern woman in her 50s who'd likely expected to side with Margaret, studied our documents with concern, her brow furrowed as she traced the discrepancies with a pen. These are serious claims, she said, her voice measured but firm. I'm granting a 3-week continuance to verify these reports. She glared at Charles, her eyes sharp. I expect an explanation for this arborous discrepancy. As the meeting dissolved into chaos, voices overlapping in a cacophony of shock and anger, I overheard Henry whispering to Margaret near the exit, their heated exchange just audible over the din. This is spiraling. We need to move to Plan B before they dig deeper, he hissed, his voice low but urgent, his hand gripping her arm. Margaret's reply chilled me, her words a dagger in the charged air. Handle it tomorrow. Make them understand they're not welcome. Their desperate glances our way sent a wave of unease through me, a premonition of danger that settled in my bones like frost. James approached as we left, his face grave, his hand on my shoulder a grounding force in the storm. You've shaken them, and that's dangerous, he warned, his voice low as we stepped into the cool night air, the stars above a stark contrast to the tension we'd left behind. Margaret doesn't lose well. Be careful. Laura nodded, her military instincts on high alert, her posture rigid as she scanned the parking lot for threats. We're ready, she said, her voice firm, her hand brushing against the phone in her pocket, where our evidence was backed up. Cameras are on 24/7, and I've added motion sensors. They won't catch us off guard. But we didn't realize how far they'd go or how soon. 2 days later, I had to attend an overnight architecture conference in Miami, the timing a cruel twist of fate that left me torn. I hesitated to leave, the weight of the escalating situation pressing against me like a physical force, but Lauren insisted, her voice steady as she packed my suitcase. We can't let them dictate our lives, she said, her hands folding a shirt with precision, her eyes meeting mine with a quiet resolve. I can handle this. As a security commander, she was more than capable, her training a shield against any threat. But neither of us anticipated Margaret's next move, a desperate gambit that would push us to the edge. Lauren later recounted that at 9 p.m., as the house settled into the quiet of the evening, the doorbell rang, its chime a jarring intrusion in the stillness. Emily was asleep, her soft snores filtering through the baby monitor, and Lauren was reviewing base protocols at the dining table, the glow of her laptop casting shadows on the walls. Through the doorbell camera, she saw 2 men in police uniforms, their postures stiff and unnatural, the badges glinting oddly in the porch light, a detail that sparked a flicker of suspicion in her trained mind. The air outside was thick with the scent of jasmine, a deceptive calm that belied the storm about to break. Ma'am, I'm Officer Daniel Harris, and this is Officer Michael Reed with the county sheriff's office, the taller one said as Lauren cracked the door, keeping the chain on, her hand resting lightly on the frame. He flashed a badge too quickly to read, his movements deliberate but off, lacking the practiced ease of a real officer. We have an eviction order due to HOA violations and safety concerns about your maple tree. The second man held up a document with county letterhead, its edges crisp in the dim light. Lauren's instinct screamed. This was a setup, a desperate ploy to force us out. Her heart raced as she studied the document through the crack in the door, her trained eye catching the flaws. The seal was blurry. The signature didn't match prior court documents, and jurisdiction was misspelled, a glaring error that confirmed her suspicions. "May I see that paperwork more closely?" she asked, her voice calm but her pulse pounding as she covertly texted her colleague, Officer Jessica Harper, at the real sheriff's office, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed. The men hesitated, their eyes darting to each other, a silent communication that only deepened Lauren's unease. They passed the document through the door, its paper cool against her fingers as she scanned it, her mind racing with a mix of fear and fury. "This is unusual for an HOA matter," she said, stalling for time, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I'll need your badge numbers to verify this nighttime enforcement." The men shifted, their confidence wavering, their boots scuffing against the porch as they exchanged another glance. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job," the second man said, his tone forced, a faint tremor in his voice that betrayed his nerves. "We need to inspect the tree, it's a hazard." Upstairs, Emily's door creaked open, the sound a sharp jolt in the tense silence. "Mom, who's at the door?" she called, her voice trembling with fear, her small silhouette visible at the top of the stairs. Lauren's heart clenched, a wave of guilt and protectiveness crashing over her as she forced a smile into her voice, her eyes never leaving the men. "It's okay, sweetie," she called back, her tone softer than the steel in her spine. "Just a misunderstanding. Go back to bed." She turned to the men, her expression hardening, her voice firm as she stepped into her role as commander. "I need to see your badges again, and I'll call your supervisor to confirm this." The men grew agitated, the first one's hand twitching toward his holster in a clear intimidation tactic, the movement sending a jolt of adrenaline through her. That was when Lauren decided to act, her training taking over as she reached for her Air Force Security Commander ID, the card a tangible reminder of her authority. She held it up, the porch light glinting off the badge, her voice like steel as she spoke. "I'm Major General Lauren Grayson, Commander at MacDill Air Force Base. I believe you're impersonating officers, a federal crime. My colleague is on her way to verify your identities. Explain yourselves now." The men's bravado collapsed, their faces draining of color, the false confidence melting away like ice in the sun. The second man, Michael, stammered, "We didn't know. We were just hired to—" Daniel cut him off, his voice sharp, but it was too late. "We were contracted by the HOA, by Henry Marshall, to scare you," he admitted, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. "He said you'd back down if we showed up with official papers." Lauren's phone, recording the exchange, captured every word, the device a silent witness to their confession as she stood unwavering in the doorway. "You have 20 seconds to explain before I place you under citizen's arrest," she said, her voice a command that brooked no argument, her heart pounding with a mix of triumph and fear. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Jessica had arrived with backup, her response swift and decisive. The men's eyes widened, their hands raising in surrender as the reality of their situation sank in, their fake badges glinting mockingly in the light. I watched the body camera footage later, the grainy video a window into a moment I wished I'd witnessed in person, the shock on Daniel and Michael's faces as they were cuffed, a visceral satisfaction that tempered the fear of that night. Michael confessed they were former security guards Henry often hired for special jobs to intimidate residents, his voice breaking as he spoke, the weight of his actions crushing him. He admitted Henry targeted Lauren specifically, thinking she'd be an easier mark while I was away, a grave miscalculation that would prove their undoing. By morning, what started as an HOA dispute had escalated into federal charges: conspiracy, impersonation, intimidation, and fraud. The list a damning indictment of Margaret's reign. I rushed home from Miami, Lauren's words echoing in my mind as I drove through the pre-dawn darkness, the highway stretching endlessly before me. "They've crossed into criminal territory. We're done playing defense. It's time to strike back." Our dining room became a war room, dubbed Operation Maple Defense by Lauren, a name that brought a fleeting smile to her lips despite the tension. Papers, timelines, and evidence covered the table, the surface disappearing beneath a sea of documents as Lauren, still in her uniform, coordinated with Jessica and James, her voice steady as she issued orders. Emily stayed with friends for safety, a precaution that tore at my heart but felt necessary, the thought of her caught in this storm a constant ache in my chest. Daniel and Michael gave full statements. Jessica said as I arrived, setting down my overnight bag, the scent of travel clinging to me. Henry hired them to intimidate you with fake credentials and forged documents. We searched his home and found templates for the fakes, plus notes on your routines and camera positions. Lauren had leveraged her military network to fast-track the investigation, her contacts a lifeline in the chaos. The Air Force Criminal Investigation Unit is involved, she said, her voice resolute, her uniform a stark reminder of the authority she wielded. Targeting a military officer like this could breach federal laws. They're looking into Henry's surveillance for potential security threats. The scope of the investigation widened, a ripple effect that caught Margaret and Henry off guard. They hadn't just picked the wrong family. They'd stumbled into a national security issue. Their actions a domino that set off a chain reaction they couldn't control. James added his own evidence, revealing years of documented HOA abuses, his folders a meticulous record of Margaret's reign. I kept records, knowing someone would eventually fight back, he said, his smile grim, his eyes reflecting a quiet resolve. I didn't expect it to involve fake cops and federal charges. Our allies grew after the fake cop incident, their support a beacon in the darkness. Linda Harper, the HOA treasurer, called Lauren the next morning, her voice trembling with guilt and determination. Margaret authorized payments to Henry for security consultations without board approval, she whispered, handing over financial records in a quiet corner of the community center, her hands shaking as she glanced over her shoulder. Other neighbors, once too scared to speak, shared their own stories of harassment, their voices a chorus of defiance that bolstered our resolve. The most unexpected ally was Tom Bennett, a local journalist investigating Apex Construction's ties to city officials, his investigation a parallel thread that intersected with ours. Your case connects the dots, he said during our first meeting at a crowded coffee shop, his notebook filled with scribbled notes. I've tracked Apex's pattern. Target properties, harass owners with HOA rules, force sales at a loss, then exempt their shell companies from the same rules. You're the first to fight back with hard evidence. Margaret made one last desperate move, sending an emergency HOA notice for another meeting to present conclusive evidence against us and authorize legal action, her words a final gambit to rally the community before the criminal probe went public. The notice arrived on a rainy afternoon, the paper damp from the drizzle, its words a stark reminder of the battle ahead. We were ready, our evidence a shield against her lies. Lauren arranged for Jessica to attend officially, her uniform a symbol of authority that would counter Margaret's narrative. Tom would document everything, his camera a silent witness to the truth, and an FBI agent, Samantha Reed, would investigate Richard Evans' ties to Apex, her presence a quiet threat that loomed over the proceedings. The night before the meeting, Lauren and I sat on our back porch, the maple tree's branches swaying gently above us, its leaves rustling like a protective whisper in the evening breeze. The air was cool, the scent of damp earth grounding us as we sipped coffee, the mugs warm against our hands. Do you regret buying this house? I asked, the weight of the past months heavy on my shoulders, the question a quiet confession of my own doubts. Lauren paused, her eyes tracing the tree's silhouette against the dusk sky, the fading light casting a golden glow on her face. No, she said finally, her voice soft but firm, a quiet strength in her words. The military taught us that the best things in life are worth fighting for. This home, this tree, it's Emily's future. It's our future, and Margaret chose the wrong enemies. She squeezed my hand, her touch a lifeline in the storm, a reminder of the partnership that had carried us through years of challenges. But our moment of peace was shattered by a call from Jessica, her voice urgent as it crackled through the phone. Margaret filed a legitimate court order today, using the same fake arborist report, she said, her words a jolt that snapped us back to reality. It's a valid inspection order until challenged. She's covering her tracks. Lauren's eyes narrowed, her mind already racing with strategy. She's trying to legitimize the fake cops as a misunderstanding, she said, her voice sharp as she set down her mug, the coffee sloshing slightly. We'll counter this at the meeting. We spent the next hour with James, crafting our response over a tense phone call, the rain tapping against the windows a steady rhythm to our planning. The meeting wasn't just about clearing our name. It was about exposing the entire conspiracy, a final stand that would determine the fate of our home and our tree. The community center was packed on the night of the emergency meeting, the air thick with whispers and speculation as word of the fake cop incident spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Margaret sat at the center of the board table, composed and confident, her auburn bun impeccable, her eyes scanning the crowd with a predatory calm. Charles sat beside her, his legal documents arranged with precision, while Henry's seat was conspicuously empty. He'd called in sick after the police search, his absence a silent admission of guilt. I noticed several unfamiliar faces in the audience, their expressions a mix of curiosity and tension, including a stern-looking woman in a well-tailored suit who I later learned was FBI agent Samantha Reed. Margaret opened with confidence, her voice smooth and rehearsed, her words a carefully crafted narrative meant to sway the crowd. "We're here to address the Graysons' violations and authorize final legal action," she said, her tone dripping with authority. "They've refused to remove a hazardous tree, endangering the community." Charles presented the court order, claiming a judge found merit in their safety concerns, threatening contempt charges if we resisted, his voice a smug drawl that grated against my nerves. Margaret added, "Recent enforcement misunderstandings are regrettable, but all actions were legal and in the community's interest." Her words were a lie, a desperate attempt to rewrite the narrative, but we were ready to tear it apart. I stood, Lauren beside me, our hands brushing as we prepared to speak, a silent reminder of our unity. What Margaret calls misunderstandings was criminal impersonation of law enforcement, orchestrated by Henry Marshall at her direction. I said, my voice steady despite the weight of every eye in the room, the words a spark that ignited a firestorm of gasps. Jessica stepped forward in uniform, her badge glinting in the fluorescent light, her presence a stark contrast to the fake officers who'd stood on our porch. 2 individuals were arrested at the Graysons' home for impersonating officers with forged documents, she announced, her voice clear and authoritative, cutting through the murmurs. They've identified Henry as their employer, hired to intimidate the Graysons and force access to their property. Margaret's face paled, her hands gripping the edge of the table, but she recovered quickly, her voice rising in a desperate bid to regain control. "This is outrageous," she interjected, her auburn bun loosening as she gestured wildly. "Henry may have hired private security, but there's no board involvement. Our court order proves our concerns were valid." Lauren countered, her voice ablade as she projected the fake arborist report beside the court order, the 2 documents a damning comparison on the screen. "This order was obtained with a fraudulent report from a company that closed 2 years ago," she said, her tone unwavering, her hazel eyes blazing with resolve. "No legitimate arborist has inspected our tree." She turned to the residents, her voice softening but no less powerful, her words a call to arms. "But this isn't just about a tree. With practiced precision, we laid out the conspiracy, our voices a steady rhythm as we presented our evidence. Margaret's apex ties, the pattern of harassment against homeowners whose properties stood in the way of development, and the misused HOA funds that financed her campaign." Tom confirmed his upcoming exposé, his camera flashing as he documented the moment, while neighbors shared their own stories of intimidation, their voices a growing chorus that drowned out Margaret's protests. Linda, trembling but resolute, admitted Margaret forced her to falsify records, her confession a tearful reckoning that echoed through the room. In the weeks that followed, our maple tree was officially designated a protected heritage asset by unanimous vote, its branches standing as a testament to our victory. Apex's expansion halted pending investigation, and Margaret faced charges of conspiracy, fraud, and fund misappropriation, her empire crumbling under the weight of her own greed. Henry took a plea deal, testifying against her for leniency, his betrayal a final nail in her coffin. The community began to heal, and we hosted a barbecue beneath our maple tree's sprawling branches, the scent of grilled corn and laughter filling the air. Neighbors who'd once avoided us now mingled freely, sharing stories of relief and renewal, their smiles a balm to the wounds of the past months. Emily started a nature club for the kids, using the tree as their base, a symbol of resilience and victory that stood taller than ever. Watching the sunset paint the leaves golden, I turned to Lauren, the warmth of her presence a quiet anchor in the fading light. "In a strange way, we owe Margaret a thank you," I said, my voice soft with reflection. "Her schemes brought us closer to this community. Lauren smiled, her arm around my waist, her hazel eyes reflecting the amber glow of the sky. Sometimes, fighting a common enemy forges the strongest bonds, even stronger than this ancient maple. Her words lingered, a reminder that courage and unity can turn even the darkest battles into moments of light. What's worth fighting for in your life? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how you've stood up for what matters most. As dusk settled and fairy lights twinkled in the branches, I raised a glass to our neighbors. The clink of glass is a melody of newfound connection. To community, I said, my voice thick with emotion, the words a quiet vow. Not the kind defined by rules and appearances, but the kind where we stand together, protect what's right, and let a stubborn old maple stand tall for another 200 years. Laughter filled the air, the maple tree's leaves rustling softly overhead, a sentinel watching over a neighborhood reborn. At Daily Narrated Stories, we bring you tales of hope, courage, and triumph that inspire and uplift. Don't miss out. Subscribe now and join our community. We're racing to 1,000 subscribers, and your support can make it happen today.